In a world of great power rivalry, the countries in between have a choice: compete with each other for favor, or to combine to create a third path with impact.
January 20th, 2026. A standing ovation echoes through the main hall at Davos. The man receiving it isn't a tech billionaire, not a Hollywood star, not even a head of a superpower. It's Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, and the speech he just delivered didn't predict a crisis. It announced that the crisis had already begun. What happened next wasn't diplomacy. It was personal. Within 24 hours, Donald Trump would tell Canada it only exists because America allows it to. The invitation Carney had received to join Trump's Board of Peace would be rescinded on social media, and the world would watch as America's closest ally openly rejected the idea that Washington still sets the rules. This isn't about left versus right. This is about the moment a middle power stood up and said, "The emperor has no clothes and we're done pretending otherwise." Let's break down what actually happened. Mark Carney walked onto that stage with a speech titled "Principled and Pragmatic: Canada's Path." The title sounds diplomatic. The content was anything but. Within the first 5 minutes, Carney used a word that sent shockwaves through the room. Rupture. Not transition, not shift. Rupture.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
He wasn't describing a changing world order. He was declaring it dead. Here's the core argument. For decades, the global system has been held together by what Czech dissident Václav Havel called rituals people privately know to be false. Nations pretended the rules applied equally. They pretended trade was fair. They pretended alliances were based on principle, not just power. And according to Carney, that pretense just collapsed. He then quoted Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian who chronicled the Peloponnesian War. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. In normal times, that's a warning. In Davos in January 2026, it was a diagnosis. The strong, meaning superpowers, were no longer even bothering with the illusion of fairness. They were using trade, supply chains, and defense commitments as weapons, and the weak were being told to accept it. But Carney didn't stop there. He pivoted to what he called middle powers, countries like Canada, Australia, South Korea, the Nordic nations. And then he delivered the line that would define the entire speech. Middle powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Argue the middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But I'd also say that great powers can afford for now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination.
The room erupted. A standing ovation at Davos is rare. A standing ovation for a Canadian Prime Minister calling out the entire power structure of the post-war world? Unheard of. Commentators immediately started comparing it to Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech in 1946. And just like Churchill, Carney wasn't predicting the end of an era. He was announcing that it had already ended. Now here's where it gets personal. Donald Trump was also at Davos, and even though Carney never mentioned him by name, everyone in that room knew exactly who the speech was aimed at. Trump had spent months talking about annexing Greenland, suggesting Canada should become the 51st state, threatening tariffs on any country that didn't fall in line with American policy. Carney's speech was a direct, public rejection of that worldview. Trump's response came the next day, and it wasn't a formal rebuttal, it was a threat. Speaking to a much quieter room, Trump called Canada ungrateful for American protection. Then he said something that would dominate headlines for weeks. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, before you make your statements.
We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
Read that again. The President of the United States just told the Prime Minister of Canada that his country only exists because America allows it to. Not as a joke, not as hyperbole, as a stated fact delivered in front of the global elite, and then Trump connected it to something he called the Golden Dome, a new U.S. missile defense system. His argument went like this: the Golden Dome will defend American airspace. Canada is geographically above the United States. Therefore, the system automatically defends Canada too. Therefore, Canada owes the United States not just gratitude, but compliance, possibly even sovereignty. This wasn't a defense policy announcement. This was leverage, and it was being deployed against America's oldest ally in public on a global stage. But Trump wasn't done. A few weeks earlier, he had invited Carney to join something called the Board of Peace. According to Trump, this would be the most prestigious international group ever assembled, designed to manage global stability in the new era. Carney had been told he was being considered for a seat at the table, a recognition of Canada's middle power status. Within days of the Davos speech, that invitation was gone. Trump announced on social media that the Board of Peace was moving forward without Canada. He called it a historic achievement, bringing together 19 nations committed to peace and prosperity. But here's the problem: not a single major global power accepted the invitation. China ignored it. India ignored it. France, Germany, the UK, silent. The 19 countries that did show interest were mostly small nations, many of them economically dependent on US aid. And then the rumors started. Multiple sources claimed that joining the board required a $1 billion contribution. Late-night comedians had a field day. Trevor Noah called it the world's most expensive group chat. John Oliver described it as a geopolitical timeshare pitch. Critics started using a new nickname for Trump: Taco. Trump always chickens out. The Board of Peace was supposed to prove American leadership. Instead, it exposed how isolated that leadership had become. But this isn't just about hurt feelings or diplomatic snubs. There's a real strategic battle happening here, and it's centered on the Arctic. Trump has been obsessed with Greenland for years. He's talked about buying it, annexing it, even threatening Denmark with tariffs if they didn't negotiate. Why? Because climate change is opening up the Arctic. New shipping routes, massive mineral deposits, strategic military positioning between North America, Europe, and Russia. Whoever controls the Arctic in 2030 will have leverage over global trade and security. Canada is an Arctic nation. So is Denmark through Greenland. And Mark Carney made it very clear in Davos: Canada stands with Denmark and Greenland's right to self-determination. No annexation, no bullying, no American exceptionalism disguised as protection. Trump threatened Greenland with tariffs. Denmark didn't budge. Trump claimed a new framework was being negotiated with NATO. NATO officials publicly denied it. And eventually, Trump backed off, claiming victory anyway. That's where the Taco nickname came from. And it stuck because it fit a pattern. Big threats, public escalation, quiet retreat, declare victory. But for Carney, the Greenland issue was never just about one island. It was about proving a principle that middle powers don't need American permission to make their own decisions. And then came the China move. In late 2025, Carney's government quietly signed a deal allowing Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market. This wasn't a random trade decision. It was a direct challenge to U.S. policy. Washington had been pressuring allies to maintain a total blockade on Chinese EVs, treating it as a matter of national security. Carney disagreed. His argument: Canada is a sovereign nation with its own economic interests, and those interests include access to affordable technology from the world's second-largest economy. For Ottawa, this wasn't about China. It was about proving Canada could choose for itself, that it didn't need a permission slip from Washington to engage with the world, and that the era of automatic alignment with U.S. foreign policy was over. This is what Trump couldn't accept, not the policy itself, the principle behind it, that Canada, a nation of 40 million people, would publicly defy American pressure and face no consequences, that middle powers could coordinate, resist, and win. And that's exactly what Carney was signaling in Davos. When Carney returned to Canada, he didn't retreat. He doubled down. Speaking from Quebec City, he addressed the nation directly. Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. The response was immediate. Across the political spectrum, Canadians rallied. Conservative critics of Carney, who had spent months attacking his economic policies, praised the speech. Liberal commentators called it the most important moment in Canadian foreign policy since Lester Pearson won the Nobel Peace Prize. Even separatist movements in Quebec paused their campaigns to applaud the message of Canadian sovereignty. But it wasn't just domestic. California Governor Gavin Newsom publicly praised Carney's courage of convictions, drawing a sharp contrast with Trump. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte declared, "Canada is back." European diplomats quietly began reaching out to Ottawa, exploring new frameworks for middle power coordination that didn't require American approval. And then came the surprising detail. Canadian military enlistment spiked, not by a small margin, by double digits in the weeks following Trump's Canada Lives because of the United States comment. Recruitment offices reported a surge in applications, particularly from young people who said they were motivated by a desire to defend Canadian sovereignty. One 19-year-old applicant told reporters, "If someone thinks we only exist because they allow it, maybe we need to prove otherwise." This is the part that gets overlooked in the day-to-day news cycle. The Davos clash wasn't just political theater. It touched something deeper, a sense of national identity, of dignity, of refusing to accept subordination as the price of security. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous, because identity-based conflicts don't de-escalate easily. They don't resolve through compromise or negotiation. They require one side to back down or both sides to find a new framework entirely. Right now, neither seems likely. Trump returned to Washington facing what one outlet called a cold reception. Congressional Republicans, many of whom have deep ties to Canadian trade and defense industries, were reportedly furious. Furious that the president had publicly humiliated a key ally. Defense analysts warned that alienating Canada could undermine NORAD, the joint North American defense system that has protected both countries since 1958. And polling showed that even among Trump's base, the idea of annexing Canada or threatening a sovereign ally was deeply unpopular. But Trump didn't apologize. He didn't walk it back. Instead, he doubled down, claiming that Carney's speech proved Canada was ungrateful and aligned with globalist elites. He suggested that the next round of tariffs would include Canadian goods, and hinted that future defense cooperation might depend on Canada showing respect. Meanwhile, Carney has continued building what he calls coalitions of the willing, middle powers who are ready to act independently of superpower demands. Australia has quietly signaled interest. South Korea has opened back-channel discussions. The Nordic countries, already skeptical of U.S. reliability after Trump's Greenland threats, are reportedly exploring new security partnerships that don't rely on American guarantees. This is the new landscape, not a Cold War with two superpowers dividing the world into blocks, but a fragmented order, where middle powers coordinate against coercion, where alliances are transactional, and where the assumption of American leadership is no longer automatic. And it all started with a speech in Davos, a standing ovation, and a Canadian Prime Minister who decided to take down the sign and stop pretending the old rituals still worked. But let's zoom out for a moment, because what's happening between Washington and Ottawa isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a larger shift that's been building for years, a shift that most people didn't see coming. For decades, the post-World War II order operated on a simple bargain. America provides security, allies provide loyalty, everyone trades under rules written in Washington, and in exchange, smaller nations get protection, market access, and a seat at the table. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, until it didn't. The cracks started showing years ago, when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement in his first term, when he threatened to leave NATO unless allies paid more, when he launched trade wars against friends and enemies alike. But those were seen as anomalies, temporary disruptions from an unconventional president. The assumption was that the system would snap back, that the next administration would restore normalcy, that America's allies would wait it out. And for a while they did, but something changed. Maybe it was the Afghanistan withdrawal, the chaotic exit that left allies scrambling and questioning American reliability. Maybe it was the Ukraine war, where European nations realized they couldn't depend on Washington to defend their own backyard. Maybe it was China's rise, and the realization that the global economy no longer revolves around American consumers. Or maybe it was just exhaustion. Exhaustion from being lectured about shared values while being threatened with tariffs. Exhaustion from being told to follow American leadership while watching that leadership become increasingly erratic. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. America's allies are hedging. They're building backup plans. They're coordinating without Washington, and they're doing it openly. This is what makes Carney's Davos speech so significant. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a declaration of independence, not from the alliance itself, but from the assumption that the alliance requires automatic obedience. Carney didn't say Canada would leave NATO. He didn't threaten to cut off trade. He didn't even say Canada would stop cooperating with the United States. What he said was simpler and more radical. He said, we're equals, we're partners, not subordinates. And if you treat us like a dependency, we'll act like a sovereign nation. That's the message that got the standing ovation, because it's the message dozens of other countries have been waiting to hear someone say out loud. And now that it's been said, it can't be unsaid. Let's talk about what happens next, because the Davos clash is just the beginning. There are three possible paths forward. Path 1, Trump backs down. He realizes that alienating Canada, America's second largest trading partner and longest land border, is strategic suicide. He walks back the threats, offers some face-saving compromise, and the relationship stabilizes. This is the optimistic scenario. It's also the least likely, because backing down would require Trump to admit he was wrong, and nothing in his political career suggests he's willing to do that. Path 2, Carney backs down. The pressure becomes too much. Canadian businesses start lobbying for reconciliation. The public gets nervous about economic retaliation, and Ottawa quietly returns to the old model of quiet diplomacy and behind-the-scenes negotiation. This is the pragmatic scenario. It's more likely than Path 1, but it comes with a cost. Because if Carney backs down after that speech, it sends a message to every other middle power. Defiance doesn't work, and the rupture he announced in Davos gets postponed, not prevented. Path 3, escalation. Neither side backs down. Trump follows through on tariff threats. Canada retaliates. Other middle powers start choosing sides. The NATO alliance fractures, and the world gets a preview of what a post-American order actually looks like. This is the dangerous scenario. It's also, unfortunately, the most realistic, because both leaders have now staked their credibility on this fight. Trump can't afford to look weak after threatening a neighbor. Carney can't afford to look weak after declaring sovereignty. And in a battle over credibility, compromise becomes almost impossible. So where does that leave the rest of us? If you're in Canada, you're watching your government navigate the most dangerous diplomatic crisis in a generation. If you're in the United States, you're watching your country alienate its most reliable ally over what amounts to a personal grudge. If you're in Europe, you're wondering whether the transatlantic alliance can survive another 4 years of unpredictability. And if you're in the global south, you're watching the old powers tear each other apart and wondering if this is finally your moment to build something new. Because here's the thing about ruptures. They create opportunities. When the old order breaks down, new players emerge, new coalitions form, new rules get written. And the question isn't whether change is coming. The question is who gets to shape it. Carney is betting that middle powers, working together, can fill the vacuum left by declining American leadership. Trump is betting that American threats still carry enough weight to enforce compliance. The rest of the world is watching to see who's right, and the answer will determine what the next decade looks like. Will it be a multipolar world where regional powers balance against each other? Will it be a new Cold War with the US and China dividing the globe into competing blocs? Or will it be something entirely new, a networked order where coalitions shift based on issues rather than ideology? We don't know yet, but we know this. The old answer, American hegemony backed by military and economic dominance, is no longer working. And Davos 2026 was the moment when everyone stopped pretending otherwise. One more thing worth mentioning. The public reaction to all this has been fascinating. In Canada, support for increased defense spending has jumped 20 points since Trump's comments. Political parties that used to argue about healthcare and taxes are now united around the message of sovereignty. And younger Canadians who grew up with relatively friendly US-Canada relations are experiencing something their grandparents knew well: genuine fear of their southern neighbor. In the United States, the reaction is more divided. Trump's base sees this as standing up to ungrateful allies. His critics see it as needlessly antagonizing a friendly nation. But interestingly, there's a growing bipartisan concern that America is losing influence, not because it's being outcompeted, but because it's making itself irrelevant. When your allies start building systems that don't include you, it doesn't matter how powerful you are. You're just powerful and alone. And history shows that powerful and alone doesn't last. There's also an economic dimension here that can't be ignored. The US-Canada trade relationship is worth over $900 billion annually. More than 2 million American jobs depend on trade with Canada. Canadian energy powers American homes and factories. American technology drives Canadian industries. It's one of the most integrated economic relationships in the world. And now it's under threat, not because of economics, but because of ego. Canadian business leaders have started quietly exploring contingency plans, diversifying supply chains, looking for alternative markets, reducing dependence on American customers. This isn't happening overnight, but it's happening. And once those relationships shift, they don't easily shift back. American exporters are beginning to feel the chill. Orders are being delayed, contracts are being reviewed, new partnerships are being explored with European and Asian suppliers instead. The economic consequences of this diplomatic rupture won't show up in next quarter's GDP, but they will compound over years. And by the time the damage becomes obvious, it may be too late to reverse. Meanwhile, other middle powers are taking notes. If Canada can stand up to American pressure and survive, what's stopping them? Japan is watching. South Korea is watching. Poland is watching. Even Israel, one of America's most reliable allies, is reportedly reconsidering its automatic alignment with Washington on certain issues. This is the cascading effect Carney was betting on. That one successful act of defiance would inspire others. That middle powers would realize they have more leverage than they thought. That coordination beats isolation. And so far, he appears to be right. The coalition he's building isn't formal. There's no treaty, no headquarters, no flag. But there are conversations, back-channel communications, shared understandings, and a growing recognition that the old rules no longer apply. This is what worries American strategists. Not the loss of Canada specifically, but what Canada represents. If the closest ally can walk away, anyone can. And if everyone walks away, what's left of American leadership? So if the old order no longer listens, who will the world listen to next? That's the question Carney posed in Davos. And it's the question we're all living through right now. Maybe it's a coalition of middle powers acting together to resist coercion. Maybe it's China, filling the vacuum left by American retreat. Maybe it's no one. And we enter a period of genuine multipolarity, where power is diffuse and outcomes are unpredictable. Whatever the answer, it won't look like the world we knew. And that's both terrifying and exhilarating. Because ruptures are painful, but they're also liberating. They force us to stop pretending, to stop participating in rituals we know to be false, and to start building something new. Whether that new system is better or worse than the old one depends entirely on what we do next, on whether we choose cooperation or conflict, dialogue or dominance, shared prosperity or zero-sum competition. The Davos showdown gave us a glimpse of the stakes. Now we get to see how the story ends. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this video is based on public information, historical context, and my own analysis. It's not a call to action, not an instruction, and not a claim about anyone's intentions. It's simply one perspective on a fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can see the same facts and reach different conclusions, and that's healthy. No matter where you stand, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, and peace, without fear or hate. You're welcome to share your own perspective in the comments, respectfully and thoughtfully. Thank you for watching and for thinking critically. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives.